The Nature of Research, Part 1. Throughout this video, I'll have large portions of text, and you'll want to, at that point, hit your space bar or some other means to pause, as you can read them more quickly than I can speak them. In this module, we have 6 topics to cover, and this video will highlight the first 3. So a good place to start is with a quiz, and in fact, now's a good time to hit that space bar because as soon as I stop speaking, I'll reveal the answer. There's a reason for this madness, and we'll go back to this later on, why we included this, but for now, some time ago I received a mass emailing, and it had a subject heading, something to the effect of God's glory in His creation. And all these interesting critters that our Creator has made. I'm going through the slide deck, and I come across this one here, and my antenna's raised, and I say, hey, this doesn't seem right to me. Let me do some investigating and find out what's going on. So I took the time to check out, and I found this Photoshop contest. And the goal was to create a land-sea hybrid. And first place here, you can see someone took the picture of a cow's head, and photoshopped it to a manatee's body, and there you have your sea cow. And so lo and behold, looking through this, here's honorable mention. So what in fact started off as part of a slide deck of God's creation was really somewhat of man's creation, right? Well, research is simply investigating. Here's a problem, there's a question, you want to get to the truth of the matter. And scientific inquiry is pretty much investigating. And quantitative research is throwing in some numbers so we can quantify or measure the degree to what extent our findings either justify or conclude otherwise. And here are some key characteristics: objectivity, measurability, be detailed in our explanation in case others want to replicate it, this in turn leads to data presentation. We finally get to formalized hypotheses. And for our inferential statistics, we'll want to generalize what we find to the larger population. The scientific method. Let's make this personal here. Some time ago, I was tasked with creating a reading program for international students. English was not their first language. I had a background in linguistics. And for my reading program, the research pointed to vocabulary acquisition as a key for them to exceed in reading. And as a particular strategy, I chose words and word parts that were based on Latin, and Greek as well. But as far as Latin goes, this was challenged by a colleague of mine who said that, hey, if someone has a Spanish background, well, Spanish language is Latinate in origin, and that person would have an unfair advantage to the colleagues. And I thought about that, I was challenged, and my belief was that, my colleague is right, I believe that. It would be an initial advantage. But I also believe that at the end of the semester, both have been introduced to a mnemonic, a way of learning these words, and now it's a matter of student motivation and other factors. I think results would pretty much level out. So you can see research, just like the fish, the elephant fish, and my colleague at work with vocabulary, it starts with a problem, something that gets your interest piqued and you want to get an answer for. So I set up an experiment between 2 groups, Latin-based and non-Latin-based. And the pre-test would address the first problem, and a post-test the second. Formalize these in research questions. Then we put out the hypothesis. And we'll discuss this more in depth later on. And then we test it. And for this, I created my own test instrument, multiple choice. And this is where our little quiz came in earlier. Circumference is a Latin-based word, and students, it's suspected that if their background is Latin, like Spanish, French, or others, Italian, they might know this word, or at least know the word part, the root, and know that circ means around, as in circle, and have that advantage. Well, sure enough, my colleague's suspicion was correct that Latin-based students would have an advantage going in, both with vocabulary and for the word parts. For the post-test, yes, Latin-based students perform much better, but as far as relative growth, the Latin-based group had an increase from 88 to over 68, roughly, 20-30%, whereas the non-Latin-based group increased their score by about 80%. So though scores were not even, Latin-based did better. There was significant growth for the non-Latin-based for me to decide to keep this strategy in the vocabulary acquisition course. For word parts, there's pretty much a ceiling effect, easier for both groups to learn. But as we know, one limitation with a multiple choice test instrument is guessing. So later on, I wound up, after I published findings from this study, I replicated my own experiment and controlled for guessing, and operationalized how that was controlled, and basically 4% of the data set I had to purge from the findings because there was evidence of guessing. Analyze the data. And here's where it's important to keep copious notes and detailed findings. As well, maybe increase your demographics so you can disaggregate data. For example, I can compare scores based on gender, age, look for patterns. I even had a rank scale for students to self-assess what's their prior knowledge of Greek and Latinate word parts and vocabulary, and how would that influence. Later on, it introduced a long-term post-test, a post-post test, so to speak. So in essence, research is simply investigating, whether it be the elephant fish or how my students perform under a certain intervention. And the scientific method is a means of quantifying it. And that's what we'll be doing this semester.